What's good, people? This is EC Pinchild Podcast with your one and only host, Glory Boy, back here with another special guest on the podcast. And before I even go ahead and introduce you, everybody, welcome to the most diverse podcast in Buffalo, where voices from all walks of life come together. Our goal here is simple: to create a space where you can learn from a wide variety of people with unique experiences, backgrounds, careers, whether it's business, arts, education, health, or beyond. Every episode offers something new. Our show is meant to be transparent and authenticity. Tune in, expand your perspective, and make sure you subscribe. And here today we have Mr. Sean Ryan. It is an honor to have you on the podcast.
Well, it's great to be here. I like the setup you have here. I like the vibe you got going on.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. So how is your day going so far? I mean, with the weather in Buffalo now that everything is amazing. People are outside. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling great. Could you believe last week it was 52 degrees and the heat out of my house? Regretted putting my winter jacket away, and today it's full-blown summer.
Man, tell me about it.
I've been all around the city, this morning. Started early. We're downtown for a remembrance for Gail Wells, who's a community activist who died a year ago. She had very active over at Buff State College, helping to diversify Buff State College. And then her other hat she wore, which I think was a deep passion of hers, was gardening and food security. So we were at a park today, and there people were giving out started vegetables for people to grow. It was very heartfelt. And then I was up on Hurdle Avenue over at Shoshone Park. Did you ever play any baseball at Shoshone Park?
No, I've never played baseball. I've always been a soccer person.
Yeah.
Played soccer my whole life. Until even going to college, I played soccer, and beyond that, just for a little bit till I got injured.
Right.
Then I just, switched my focus and started focusing on a lot of different other things,
It was great to see the hundreds of families over playing. They have 8 baseball diamonds there.
Man.
I think they roll through 3 sets of games every Saturday. It brought me back. I coached there for years when my kids, they're out of college now, but when they were that age, it was there every weekend all summer for several years. So it was good to be back there again, seeing all those happy kids.
Man, most definitely. So before we even get this started, some people may not know you. Some people know you. I mean, you've been all over Buffalo now. Like I've seen your poster almost everywhere. And even close to my house, some of my neighbors do have your posters as well.
Your neighbors must be very smart people. My sign's on their lawn.
Yeah, most definitely. So let's see here. So Mr. Sean Ryan is a proud Lackawanna native. He was raised in a household rooted by public service. His father was a firefighter. His mother was a teacher and active member of Erie County Democratic Committee. These early influences shaped him basically for a lifelong commitment to the city, to the community, and justice. He earned his bachelor's arts from SUNY Fredonia, Juris Doctor from Brooklyn Law School, before admitted to the New York State Bar. As an attorney, he focused on anti-discrimination and labor law, advocating for fairness and workers' rights. He served as a member of New York State Assembly from the 149th District before being elected as a state senator in 2020, where he now represents New York State's 60th District. As a senator, Mr. Ryan championed legislation to prohibit non-competing clause in New York, a significant workers' right measures to pass both houses of the legislature in 2023. He is a dedicated father who continues to fight for policies to protect working families and strengthen communities across Western New York. Did I do a good job?
That was pretty good.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, that was pretty good.
So before we even start this, take us back to your childhood. How was your childhood like?
I sort of had a mixed childhood because, at one time I had the traditional American family. My dad worked, my mom stayed at home. But like a lot of American families, we had problems in our household, substance abuse and some violence. And then I ended up being raised by my mom, raising 3 kids. And I watched from her, she used to take us down to the public library because she needed to get a job to raise us. So she became a teacher, but she would take us down to the public library, and me and my 2 sisters, and say, big library, a lot of books, you can do whatever you want here, but don't bug me. And so she was able to become a teacher. She got her certification, and she got her a job, and that brought us back on the economic rails. So there was a few years there when it was just my mom trying to figure it out, and she got first year salary for a teacher, and that was the best thing that ever happened to us. But a lot of this informs how I treat policy and what I believe in life, right? Because if you see economic insecurity and you see the struggles single women have, raising children, it's not a new problem.
Yeah.
But we need to make sure we support those families so they can stay together, stay in their houses, not get evicted and foreclosed on.
Yeah.
So it informed me. But also, what else it informed too is all those good things happened to my mom because she had a union job where she was able to get health benefits and eyeglasses and dental care, all that stuff that really is helpful to families, but it's out of reach to a lot of New Yorkers.
It's very expensive. It's very expensive now. Like my little brother, to get his glasses, like we get to pay a lot of money for his glasses here.
Yeah, you do.
And sometimes I'm like, come on, man, like that is something that can help him in some way. Like, why can't you just make it at least somehow affordable? Because not a lot of families are able to afford that.
Yeah, there's kids walking around who need glasses, who don't have glasses because their parents can't afford it. And that's, it was great coming out of a household where, we had a union-based healthcare. So glasses were part of the deal, and going to the dentist twice a year was part of the deal. But you're acutely aware that, some of your neighbors didn't have that same thing. So it is something that why you keep striving to make sure we have an equitable healthcare system where everyone can play a part in it.
Yeah. And I want to ask you this because through our childhood, we all have our own inspiration. Your father was a firefighter, so I figured maybe you became a firefighter or a police officer. What did you always wanted to become, though, since a child?
Well, this is the strangest thing because it makes no sense. I always wanted to be a plumber. I wanted to be a plumber, and I took a lot of shop classes in college, in high school, but we didn't have that track. So when I was a little kid, I wanted to be a plumber. But when I was finishing high school was when Buffalo was really in tough economic times. The steel plants had just closed. Everyone in my high school thought, doesn't matter what you do in high school, you'll get a job at the steel plant. And suddenly, almost every father in my neighborhood was unemployed. I had relatives who suddenly became unemployed, and the city was in deep financial crisis. So at that time, even the fire department had a multi-year hiring freeze. So, I had no direction, and I sort of backed into going to college. And that was the best thing that ever happened to me.
Yeah, talk to us about Fredonia.
Yeah.
How was Fredonia back then when you went there? Because right now it's different. A lot of schools have changed.
Yeah.
They're not like how it was. Because I hear stories from a lot of different people who went to Fredonia a while ago, a long time ago, and they tell me, "Oh, Fredonia was like this, was like this." Now they're welcoming more students, from all backgrounds.
Yep.
So how was it at your time?
I mean, for me, it was a great school. They met students, where they were at. So there was a whole bunch of kids there, were first generation college students. And it was a small college with small class sizes.
Yes.
And it was perfect for me. I feel if I had gone to one of the university settings, I probably wouldn't have made it out because I didn't come out of high school with a Regents diploma. I didn't have a real academic discipline background. I could change brakes on a car, but I wasn't that good at writing book reports. Okay. So Fredonia was perfect for me. It really introduced me, to learning and to enjoying learning. Some kids experience that in high school, but I didn't until college. But I really credit Fredonia for meeting me where I was at, challenging me, but absolutely opening my eyes to the whole world.
Man,
I felt like I was going. I felt like I went to college 1,000 miles from home.
Wow, and it's not that far.
It's 45. It's 45 miles.
Yeah, that's true. So, and you also did study law in school. How was your experience at Brooklyn Law School?
It was good. I mean, I took a couple years off after college because I still couldn't see myself in a white collar job with a college degree. So I didn't know what I was going to do. So I knocked around for a few years, lived in a few different spots, mostly did manual labor jobs. And then I was painting houses for 1 year out in Cape Cod. And one of the guys on my painting crew was going to law school. And we started talking about it. And I said, I don't have the money to go to law school. And he said, well, you can get loans. And, he kind of walked me through the process like he was a high school counselor or something. Right. And then a year after that, I decided, well, maybe I will apply to go to law school. And I moved to New York City, went to law school, another super eye-opening, experience.
From a small city to a big city.
Yes.
Talk to us about New York City, because there's a lot of things that, that are said about New York City that so many people don't know about.
Right.
Because most people in Buffalo, trust me, like a lot of people in Buffalo haven't been to New York City and they've been in New York State for
it's absolutely
the rest
true.
of their lives.
Yeah.
But like, how was your experiences in New York City? What did you see that was new to you?
Yeah, I mean, New York City was just a fantastic experience. Once you get out of certain parts of Manhattan, a lot of people go to New York and they go to Times Square, or they go to lower Manhattan, and it's canyons of buildings and congestion. But I lived in Brooklyn. I lived in a neighborhood. People knew each other. On the blocks at the top of my street, there was a bakery, a green grocer, a
Everything
butcher.
was closed.
Everything was closed. I could, on the way home from school each day, I'd stop and buy stuff, to make meals with. Of course, no cars, just on my bicycle or walking. So, and that also allowed me to meet people, from all over the state. A lot of New York City kids went to school at Brooklyn Law School. I got to meet them.
This is a commercial break. And as you know, man, we're always going to give a shout out to our sponsors of this video. This video is proudly sponsored by Simba Pro. Simba Pro, basically, they are the Buffalo leading media production companies known for delivering top-tier creative content. If you haven't booked with Simba Pro, I would highly recommend to do so right now. They're booking really fast. As you can see now, with the weather in Buffalo is amazing. If you have a wedding coming up, if you have a music video, if you have just anything in general, an event, make sure you book Simba Pro. Thank you so much, and let's get back into the video.
Have you spent time in New York?
I visited. I visited New York City a couple of times. I have friends there. My cousin recently moved to New York City. He's a DJ, and he talks highly of it. I mean, that's his. As a DJ in New York City, like, you work constantly.
Right.
Like you busy every day because people are able to go out almost every single day. They have parties during the day, parties at night. So
yeah, you can do so many gigs down there.
Oh yeah,
something's always happening.
Yeah,
and you get out of you. I love to ride my bike, so I always ride my bike around, and I was able just to go around the Brooklyn neighborhoods. Because you take the subway, and you don't know what's going between your stop and the next stop.
Right,
you don't see it. But getting on my bike and going around the New York City neighborhoods, you go out to Flatbush and you're in a Haitian community. You go down like 20 more blocks, you're in a Jamaican community. You go down 10 more blocks, you're in an Orthodox Jewish community. And, Buffalo is sort of split up along amongst racial lines.
Yeah.
But in New York, they're split up amongst religious lines, but everyone sort of mixes. As much as they're split, they mix too.
Yeah. It's like when I went there one time, I went to Chinatown.
Yeah.
It was so busy, and a lot of the people that I saw was Chinese. I went to...
Yeah, you think you could have been in a different country.
Yeah, it felt like I was in China,
yes.
which is crazy.
Yeah.
Felt like I was in China. So let's go ahead now and just focus on your experience as a lawyer.
Sure.
When we first started this conversation, I mentioned how, your father was a firefighter, your mother was a teacher.
Yeah.
And you had a different inspiration in life. You wanted to do something. You wanted to become a plumber, but you switched out to becoming a lawyer.
Right.
So how was it just, being a lawyer? How was your experience like?
Yeah, I knew I wouldn't fit in a corporate law firm world. I'm sort of passion driven, and I have no passion towards that. But I've always had a passion towards inequity. When I was in high school, I saw like everybody who played by the rules, went to work every day, and were told if you do that, you can raise your family. I saw all these people economically dislocated. Nothing they did, and so you get this idea that, America's got a lot of bumps in it, right? So we have to make it so when people experience those bumps, that their lives don't fall apart. So I wanted to be a lawyer that helped people, and I started working for an organization called Legal Services, Neighborhood Legal Services in Buffalo. And we did work to prevent housing foreclosures, prevent illegal evictions,
Right.
programs to keep families together. And many of the families were, was moms trying to keep all the kids, under one roof. And I was, passionate about that. And at that time, I also did a lot of housing discrimination work, where I was on the board of opportunities, I was on the board, for Housing Opportunities Made Equal, and that's an organization committed to stamping out housing discrimination, and so many housing discrimination cases in Buffalo at that time, and I would sue landlords because they refused to rent to you, mostly because of your race. We had big cases and we had small cases, but the biggest cases were like against the Public Housing Authority, who were steering people based on their race.
Have things changed though?
Things have changed, and the problems morph, and the problems become different.
Right.
But it's not like we solved the problem. So, I was doing individual representation. I represent you, but that doesn't lead to systemic change.
Yeah.
So that system sort of stays the same. You assert your rights, but it doesn't mean the next person walking down the street doesn't face the same problem.
Yeah. Yeah. So like, it's 2025. There's 5 people running to become mayors of Buffalo,
Right.
including yourself. It has been amazing to see. I mean, how everybody have stood up for themselves and going to different events and actually letting the people know their mission. And you have made your priorities clear on your website, and we're gonna go through some of them.
Sure.
And some of the challenges that Buffalo has been facing is declining population, slow job growth, and overall. And in one of your priorities list, you mentioned that you will be moving the economy forward. Elaborate more on that.
So, for too long in Buffalo, we would, give subsidies to companies to come here, but the jobs that they produced were below average wages. Right now in Buffalo, we don't really have an unemployment problem. We have a quality job problem. So we have people working full-time jobs in Buffalo who still live in poverty. So the economy you want to build is one of higher paid jobs. And then we also have to work to take people who are working full-time in lower paid jobs, and to give them the assistance and the scaffolding to go to another job, that pays more. There's often jobs in the community unfilled, but, going back to the working mother example, if you're working a low-paid job, but the boss lets you come in late when the school bus is late, doesn't dock you for it, is understanding of your situation, you can't take the risk sometimes to go to a job that pays $2 or $3 more an hour. So we have to make it so that's available to people, to not just upskill them, because sometimes people have the skills, but they can't take the risk to get into the new job.
Yeah, I mean, that's one thing when you work for someone. That's the most difficult thing, is especially for like single parents. You mentioned that earlier. Like some single parents, they have it hard. Like they don't have really nobody to look after their kid. Plus, even daycare is hard. Because
daycare's gotten so expensive.
it has been so expensive, and some people, let me say, they don't have any programs helping them out when it comes to daycare. So let's talk about also what you said about investing in Buffalo. Because we need a lot of things in Buffalo, especially in terms of like the streets. The streets in Buffalo are terrible.
That's right.
That's something that to invest in. You also mentioned that on your website, that investing in Western New York. What will you do, and what are some things that must be invested in more in our city of Buffalo?
Yeah, I mean, the city of Buffalo is, it's like an old house that's had the same owner for 20 years, but the owner didn't do any upgrades. So we really fell behind. We have potholes everywhere. We don't plow our streets efficiently. Community centers aren't open. And the pool closest to me is, Azarizi Matters Community Center next to Buff State. I think this will be its 5th summer in a row that the pool's not open. So, the basics, we're not getting the basics done. So, we need to invest more in our infrastructure, but we also have to use the state money that's given I mean, Buffalo has over $37 million of state money that was given a couple years ago that they still haven't figured out how to spend it yet. Every other community in New York State has spent that money down, and Buffalo is one of the few places that asked state for permission, to roll the money over to the next budget year. Like, why in the world are you rolling money over for that could be used to repair streets and potholes with the streets and potholes and the conditions they are in the city of Buffalo? But you drive around Buffalo, you could also tell that the potholes aren't distributed equally. Everyone's got a pothole problem in Buffalo, but the east side of Buffalo has the biggest pothole problem.
Man, you can ask my producer when it comes to like the potholes. Every time I'm driving, it's like, man, like everywhere you go, you hitting a pothole, and this is bad for the cars because then that also has to be money coming out of your pocket.
It's expensive
to fix those tires or to fix whatever that's broken because of its pothole. I watched this one video actually. This one guy was driving, I don't know, somewhere in Buffalo. He was driving a pickup truck, and then all of a sudden when he tried to turn, his car just went down.
It ate him.
Ate him. Simple. And I was like, man, like they need to fix these potholes. And that's something that a lot of youth in Buffalo have been complaining about, especially there's this kid in Buffalo that has an Instagram account, and he reports a lot about the potholes. Like, this is what's going on. But besides also the pothole, you mentioned something very important, community centers.
Right.
So me growing up, I always went to Boys and Girls Club. At some point, play soccer. It was very nice. It was very nice back then. Pools opened up and all of that. So in terms of like the youth themselves, how are you going to help the youth? And also, with the Buffalo youth jobs and stuff like that, because a lot of youth, in order to keep them away from problems, you have to keep them busy. Give them some sort of opportunity for them to work and, make their own money.
Yeah, I mean, the youth programming has fallen behind in the city of Buffalo. But we also, because we didn't invest in our softball fields, our baseball fields, our soccer facilities, they're in rough shape. Like I came today here from Shoshone Park, and Shoshone's got the most kids they've ever had playing there. But that's more of a reflection of the fact that other leagues in the city have closed down. And so, some of one of the biggest healthy leagues left is Shoshone. So kids from other parts of the city come there, but the city used to help fund baseball leagues. And so in the areas of the city where you don't have as many, parents with free time, the parents can't come and volunteer to do what they need to do over at a place like Shoshone. You can't replicate what happens at Shoshone because, that's in a very stable North Buffalo neighborhood with a generation of committed volunteers there. But unfortunately, these other leagues have closed. We used to have a basketball tournament every year called the Gus Macker Basketball Tournament. Well, the Gus Macker Basketball Tournament went away. It used to be a step competition called.
Was that something that was funded by the city?
Yeah. The city would fund these things. So, we used to fund arts, culturals, and youth activities. We stopped funding all of those things. So, it pushes it back onto places like the Boys and Girls Club, but there's not a Boys and Girls Club in every part of the city that serves everybody. We have community centers that are established to do that. But also, just what we accept as programming is just like, it's a B at best. But why can't Buffalonians get A's? Why can't we get A pluses? Like, I think we deserve better.
Oh, yeah.
I think the mayor's summer youth programs, those kids should be at the pocket parks and the playgrounds all around the city, and they should have bags of equipment, balls and bats and art equipment, and be interacting with kids, in the neighborhoods. There's so much we could do to enhance the programs aimed at young kids. We all know that young kids, without things to do, then they go find things to do.
They go find things to do. And there's a lot of things they can do because they're being fed so much online, on social media. So let's talk about it just, in general, when it comes to kids, not having anything to do. in terms of like crime
Yep.
rates. Those things do rise up. And a lot of kids end up, dropping out of school because they, they go to school and after they go on break, they don't have a summer job to do. How can they prepare for college? When college comes, they don't have nothing else to fund them or at least to buy some new clothes to start college. So let's talk about this other topic that I have here because, I mean, it's something that you have been doing for a very long time. So this is basically the fight for families is needed. We have some of the highest poverty rates here in Buffalo, 27.4% compared to the national average, which is 12.4%. There are so much income inequality. Cost of living is challenging, is a challenge, and obviously this is something that you have been fighting for your whole political career. So tell us, what will you do to make sure that families in Western New York are heard and appreciated?
Yeah, I mean, I've worked a long time in the legislature on issues like this. We almost doubled the minimum wage in the last decade, so making it so working parents can bring more money home to their kids. But if you go back to this, people talk to me a lot of times about kids riding dirt bikes and four-wheelers around the city. That's a crime problem in some way, but the other way, it's a problem of the kids not having activities. You got to keep kids busy. I want a bunch of skate parks around the city. There's no reason we don't have more of those. And if there's ever a reason, it's because we lack a public imagination in the city of Buffalo. We have vacant land all over the city of Buffalo, but we don't have places for kids to go, ride their bicycles and to, do the BMX bike riding. We don't have that. But we could have, so many of these things. Like there's programs now, to bring East Side kids down Ferry Street to the Niagara River. Go to Freedom Park there. It's an important historic park, Underground Railroad crossing. But, there's a group doing work now to bring kids to that park to go fishing every year. The Niagara River is right there, but so many kids on the other side of Buffalo have never even seen the Niagara River.
Right.
But it's a short bike ride away. But I love going for the day where you're introducing kids to fishing and there's 100 kids out there with their poles dropped into water. That's how you show kids that there's so much more to do and so many different things to do.
Yeah, most definitely. How about just the families as well? How will you be making sure that they're appreciated and heard? Because a lot of people are going to vote, and they're going to vote for people who are going to support them, who they feel as if,
That's right.
this is the person that I have trust in.
Yep. And this goes back to the basics, right? So, people tell me they want their roads repaired. They want their streets plowed because, every time we have to have a snow day because we can't plow our streets, that means so many Buffalonians can't go to work that day. And they don't get paid when they don't go to work that day. So a snow day to a lot of families means they miss a whole day's of pay. So we got to make it so parents can go to work every day, but we also have to make it so there's good economic opportunities. I really believe in the concept of taking people who are currently in the workforce and providing them with supports and scaffolds to move them in to higher paid jobs, in the economy. Make it so they can take that risk of switching jobs, without the fear of, well, if it goes wrong, then I can't pay my rent and I'm evicted. So you need to be able to show them supports like that. But people get this acute feeling in Buffalo that the services they get from the city are based on their zip code. And if they're on the east side of Buffalo, that they get substandard service.
That's how I used to feel. Because
Yeah.
like when I do drive in the suburbs, like the roads are nice and clean,
Yeah.
But when I do come into this, like inside the city of Buffalo, then everything changes. Like it's different.
Right.
And also in terms of like let's talk about like the liquor stores. Like I barely see liquor stores anywhere else but close, like
Yep.
just in the city of Buffalo.
Yeah, I mean, you go down Hurdle and Elmwood, nice streets.
Nice streets, yep.
Well, go down Jefferson, Fillmore, and Bailey, pothole streets. We have not been equitably putting our resources out into the city. And I think people on the east side have an acute feeling that they've been disinvested in. And, you counter disinvesting, by investing. And the other thing is you do for families is, I have a housing plan that's, it's 2 years old now. It's called the City of Good Neighborhoods. And we have an acute housing shortage in Buffalo, but we only have that shortage. It's because we spent 20 years demolishing thousands of homes, thinking our population was going to drop down really low. But now our population started going up, and there's no places for people to live. And a lot of homes in Buffalo are owned by seniors. So I have a program to help seniors who live in doubles to get their vacant units back online. Often it's a woman living alone after her husband passed away. Minor repair needs to be done, or a new furnace needs to be put in, but there's no money. So often the woman locks the apartment up and that's it. So we got a program now, a grant program to help get those units back online, put money into the senior's pocket, give someone a place to live, but also provide generational wealth for the families once the senior passes. And then the second program I have is to build new homes. We have between 10 and 20,000 vacant lots in the city of Buffalo, depending. Yeah, depending.
I wouldn't even know that, because it's crazy that there's a lot of things that as Buffalonians we don't really know, and that's why it's very important to have the leaders who are very transparent with us.
Right.
And just having that transparency, I think it actually gives people some sort of hope on seeing what they can also do in return in order to help the city grow.
Yeah, absolutely right. So I got a program, the second year it's been funded through the state, called Block by Block, where you go down a block and then, there's 2 or 3 or 4 lots on the block, or homes used to be, that you build a traditional single or a double back on that lot. It's got a state subsidy in it, so it would be affordable to people making under $90,000. Not long ago, you could buy a house in Buffalo for $50,000. Now the average price of a house in Buffalo is over $200,000. So it's really out of reach of most Buffalo households. The average household income in Buffalo is below $60,000.
Oh yeah.
So we got to make it so those families, people who work full time at the medical campus as a CNA, that they can actually afford a home of their own. And this is what policies that are good for families, that promote stability. And the other thing that's really good for families is, we have just a reprehensible and a shocking level of lead poisoning for children in Buffalo. It's a year in and year out. We have one of the highest rates in the United States, higher than Flint, Michigan at the time of their water crisis.
Higher than Flint, Michigan.
Higher than Flint, Michigan, when they had that water crisis. Everyone got together and shipped water to Flint, but more kids were poisoned in Buffalo that year. So we have to make sure that we aggressively, attack conditions of inside apartments to make sure they're painted and there's not chipping paint, so kids don't get poisoned. Because once a kid gets lead poisoned, it causes permanent brain damage depending on the extent of the poisoning. You can't recover from it. But this is a fixable problem, but it's one more of the many fixable problems that the leaders in the city of Buffalo, have decided that it's not worth fixing. I believe these problems are worth fixing.
Yeah, they're worth fixing. Do you think also we need more, let's say we need more people that's gonna be able to inspect the homes, like more inspectors?
Yes.
Because, and also honest inspectors, because I feel like there's some homes in Buffalo that I have a friend actually that lived in a house where it was terrible. It was terrible, but everything passed through. Everything passed through where the landlord was able to rent the house to the person, but was that house really inspected? What was going on? Because then we do need those people to be out there inspecting and making sure that whoever is renting the house, it's safe. They're safe. Plus, with the weather that we have in Buffalo, some people do run out of heaters. Like heaters will just cut off.
Yep.
Water will stop. So we need a lot of those things. And do you think you can provide that for the city?
Yeah, we have to get a lot more building inspectors. But we also have to have a better policy of how we're going to expect. Right now, it's a complaint-driven model. So if the complaint's not made, then inspections not keep being made. So You could drive by a house that's half knocked down if you're a building inspector, and go to the house next door and write them up, but not even write up the house that's half falling down because there wasn't a complaint on it. So we have to have a systematic policy of how we inspect houses. But the big change we need to make is the city of Buffalo is going to take on the responsibilities of doing interior inspections. Right now they limit themselves to exterior inspections. Right. So you're talking about a house with bad housing conditions. We got to make it so the inspector goes in the house, not just outside the house.
Not just outside the house. Let's talk about small businesses. I mean, I have a business myself, and sometimes we do need help from the city,
right?
Because small businesses, I know you mentioned that throughout like the debate, you said that small businesses actually are able to provide more jobs than a lot of these bigger corporations.
Because they do. Small businesses, they provide more jobs total than all the big businesses do.
Yeah. So how are you going to help small businesses, and what do you need from small businesses in order for you to work together in order to, build a sustainable future for Buffalo?
Sure. I've talked to a lot of people who've started small businesses in the last few years, and they all say that the city was a headache. Getting through the city permits process, getting through the inspections process where, it wasn't a comprehensive process. It was first you have to go to this department. Then you have to go to this department. And then you have to go to this department. Oh, then we're closed. You got to come back tomorrow. So, we've heard from everyone from bar owners to restaurants to breweries, just how difficult, that system was. And you really hear people talking about it if they happen to own a business in the suburbs and in Buffalo.
Right.
How much more difficult it is for the city of Buffalo. So we're going to create in my administration a small business liaison, and that each time a small business comes in, to apply to open, we're going to assign a liaison to them.
Yeah.
And that liaison will help them cut through the silos in City Hall. But we're also going to make it so, it's the jobs of the permits and the inspections. We want to promote small businesses. Our job is to make it happen for them. Follow the rules, but make it so as easy as possible to follow those rules.
Yeah, and I have another thing to say here, because in terms of like small businesses, I have one of my good friends. He's literally like my brother. So like one time he was trying to open up a business somewhere here in Buffalo, and then what happened was, because there was like other businesses around, which was pretty much owned by a lot of Caucasian men and stuff like that, he was not given the opportunity to have his business there because they all went and complained to the city council and told them, oh, we don't want this person to have a business here because his business will bring a lot of crime and stuff like that. How would you help those people who are going through those inequalities? Especially, I mean, they want to feed their family as much as the next person. But how can you help them in order for them, to at least have a space to have that business, strive?
So everybody, when they interact with the city, they should feel that they're going to be treated equally. Whether they're calling the police department, whether it's trying to get your road fixed, whether it's trying to apply for a permit, there's going to be a uniform rule of equality. The thought that, someone is going to be denied services or denied city resources, because of their race is, that's the old days. Like we're not doing that under my city hall. We're going to be welcoming, and part of that welcoming too is making sure we have language access programs, because everyone who lives in Buffalo doesn't speak English. And so when you go through these permit process, native English speakers tell me how hard these programs are. Just imagine if you're a new American living in Buffalo with limited English trying to go through these same processes. So we have to make sure that within City Hall, we have language access, so the printed material is in several different languages, and we don't want people not participating in our economy because of language issues.
Yeah, most definitely. I think that will be very helpful. You also mentioned on your website a progressive leader.
Yep.
What are some things that separate you from other candidates?
One is, the commitment, to equality. We can't look at, Buffalo black home ownership rate without admitting that rate is so low because of redlining, because of people being denied mortgages because of their race. So you have to acknowledge those problems in order to fix those problems. So I'm going to set a goal of bringing up black home ownership rate in Buffalo, which is far below the national average. But you can only do that as a policy if you recognize the wrongs that were made to make it how we are today. So we're going to do things like that, but we're also going to make it so, language access is also a part of this, making sure that City Hall works for everybody, not just your buddy or your family friend who gets contracts. We got to open it up in many ways. We operate still like City Hall is like an old boys club, or you'll be able to get this loan, or you'll be able to purchase this property, because you helped someone's campaign, or your father, knew somebody. That those things are just constricting on the city. Sure, it's unfair, and one person should not be getting special benefit, but it really closes the economy and it makes people not want to apply. I mean, there's building contractors now who will say, "Will not apply for city road projects because they won't give it to me unless I make political donations." And what do we end up getting then? Substandard contractors who know that they're getting these contracts because they made donations, and they know they don't have to perform these contracts then. So, that's what being progressive is, but also being progressive in the city of Buffalo is, making sure, we have equality, right? LGBT plus pride parade and things like that. That's not just one day. That's 365 days a year, right? We got to make sure we roll these policies all year. And I'm a big, strong supporter of refugee resettlement in the city of Buffalo. If you look at our population growth, the bulk of that population growth was from refugees and immigrants. So new Americans are really what are contributing to our economic spark right now in the city of Buffalo. We have to recognize that. We have to make sure that there's no barriers to new Americans. They can experience all the opportunities of Americans, but we also want to make sure that this inflow of people continues. So right now, the Trump administration has stopped allowing refugees in the country. We responded to that this year by providing funding for the refugee resettlement groups, to provide enhanced services to the people who are here in Buffalo. But we want to make it so those groups are still here when the Trump administration goes and we rejoin the world's community, to make sure we have these agencies who will still resettle people. Because, every time that refugee pipeline stops, not only is it a human cruelty, but it's bad for the city of Buffalo, because these are hundreds of people, who would have moved here, took jobs, opened businesses, put kids in our schools, but also brought us the next generation, the next generations of leaders, the next generation, of doctors, and the next generations of mechanics. So that, that's what we need. And the idea of sort of being an open Buffalo, to bring everyone in.
Yeah, Buffalo is filled by a lot of immigrants.
Yep.
It's filled by a lot of immigrants, and that number also, like you said, it kind of went up in like 2018, 2019. A lot of people did come to Buffalo, New York, and also it was because Buffalo it's not that expensive. Some people would tell other of their relatives like, "Hey, come live in Buffalo. I know the weather is not that good, but you can still afford, raising your family here at some point."
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, we call it secondary migration. People who settled, came to America, settled somewhere, but there were still Facebook friends with their friends who moved to Buffalo. And they're like, come here. Buffalo's great. It's welcoming. It's an open city. It's not that expensive. There's jobs. So we have people doing secondary migration all the time. And as mayor, I want to encourage that secondary migration. I chair the Economic Development Committee in the New York State Senate. And every business comes in and talks to me. They all tell me the same thing. They don't have enough people applying for their jobs. We need more people in upstate New York. And Buffalo, Rochester, and Syracuse all had population growth the last census, and almost all of that was because of new Americans.
Yeah, most definitely. Let's talk about policing.
Sure.
Because policing, as you can see, but one thing that's very confusing about Buffalo is that the crime rate goes up and down. and I believe now you have went down just significant amount of number. But like, how are you gonna be able to, use the police and the police to be able to get more involved in the community?
Yep.
Because that is very much needed. Because a lot of the police officers that get hired by the Buffalo, by the Buffalo Police Department, some of them are from different communities, and they're not really from our communities, so they're not really familiar with the way some people do act a certain way. But like, how are you gonna be able to kind of like build that community, police?
Yeah,
in the communities?
when I talk about policing, I prefer to talk about public safety, because policing is one element in public safety, but the other part of this is, youth programming. The other part of public safety is the violence interrupter groups. There's so many groups throughout Buffalo now who come to crime scenes. They're not police officers. They're active community members, and they interview young people and talk about what happened, and they try to make it so there's not a retaliatory crime that happens next. But they do that by being active in the community. But also they'll come back around the community after some violence happens, and people in the community are often more apt to talk to them than they are to the police officers. And so these people become liaisons, with the police department. So, and then when it comes to policing, we need to make sure that everyone has a confidence that they're being treated equitably, but also that the police department is accountable. And we need accountability. And I don't know if you followed this, but it came to light recently that there was an accident with an off-duty police officer who hit like 7 cars on the west side of Buffalo.
Oh yeah, I did see on the news, and he was, I think it was like, he was a sheriff, I believe.
He was.
And they kind of cover it up. He was like a sheriff, like, I don't know, like a lieutenant or something like that. And they cover up the story, and it did come to light. A lot of people did see, especially on Twitter, which is now called X.
Right.
A lot of
I
people,
still call it Twitter.
Yeah, a lot of people did see that and share it. And I was like, oh wow, that's crazy.
Only the media brought it to light.
Yeah.
So that shows there's not transparency, that the public didn't know what happened. They also hit a bunch of cars going the wrong way. And then there was a very big police response.
Was he under the influence? Nobody knows.
Yeah, we don't know what happened
Right.
but this goes to the accountability, right?
Yeah.
So everybody needs to, incidents like that, it's still being investigated. But we know it didn't really get investigated until the media brought it to light. But people need to know, let me back that up. Incidents like this reduces the public's confidence in our police department. So this goes back to this premise of the transparency. If the media did bring this to light, we probably wouldn't know about this, but also accountability. We didn't make sure that, everyone who's involved in this incident, we know what happened, and that people, go through a system of discipline for what happened, but also to be retrained, to make sure that what happened that night doesn't happen again. So, it can't be the normal thing that, it's sort of a Buffalo thing where, well, I know a guy who knows a guy, so I won't get my house inspected.
Right.
Or I know a guy who knows a guy, so, charges won't be brought against me. That just destroys the public's confidence. And then, the idea then we got to open up as a city, because as you said, there's a lot of new people in this city.
Yeah.
And none of them have the advantage of, their fathers haven't gone to grade school with somebody else's father. And so, good things are going to happen to you.
Yeah.
But in order to grow our economy, open up our city, and to make sure people have confidence in our city, city's got to treat everyone the same.
Yeah, most definitely. So my last question for you, since we're getting closer to the end now, is basically, what are you gonna do in regards to just bringing the whole city together? Because we talked about immigration, we talked about public safety and all of that, but in terms of just unity, I know Buffalo could be one of the biggest, most diverse cities in America. But how are you gonna do that in order to invite everybody as one? As you just being a leader yourself?
Yeah, the mayor of the city of Buffalo has to have a big conference table. And we need to make sure that all the voices in the city of Buffalo, come to the table. The community knows its needs the most. You can't presuppose what a community needs. You have to go listen to the community, and they'll tell you what they need. They'll tell you what they would like the city, to be like. They would tell you how they want their parks to be operated. They tell you the kind of youth sports they'd like to see. But you really have to take guidance, from the people. But you have to then consciously and strategically make sure you bring in all the voices of the city of Buffalo. You got to bring people from the east side, from Lovejoy, from Riverside, from south, the north. Everyone has to feel as though they all have a seat at Buffalo's table.
Yeah, most definitely. And I want to ask you this: what message do you have for the voters? I know we're getting closer to the end of your primaries and everything.
Sure.
We're getting almost close to there. But like, what message do you have for the voters, that are willing to go out and vote, and for the ones that that just feel like, okay, if I go vote, is it really gonna do anything?
Yep.
What message do you have for all of them?
Yeah, I have a long history of working outside of government. I had a full career where I promoted change. I was a change maker. I came into state government with that same attitude, and I was able to achieve a lot in state government. And I plan to come into city government and work fast to make change, because I've been knocking on doors in the city of Buffalo since December.
Wow.
I went from being freezing cold, to hot. But what I hear out of the people is they want to change. They don't want business as usual at City Hall. They like the fact that I'm going to bring fresh eyes and a new approach to city government. I'm not going to be the guy who says, well, we do it this way because that's the way we do it. I'm not a product of city government. So I think coming in with the outsider perspective is going to be valuable to me. But I also hear at the doors, like, we've gone backwards. My street used to not look like this. I used to have neighbors before the city demolished my neighborhood. But they all have this sense that change and progress is within reach. But we can only achieve that if we have the leadership, to bring us there. And my message has been simple, and that is Buffalo deserves better, and we can deliver better to Buffalo.
Most definitely. Thank you so much, Mr. Sean Ryan. It was a pleasure having you on the show. And guys, there you have it. This is Isipin Chat Podcast. If you haven't done so, go ahead and hit the subscribe button and go out and vote. Vote for who you think will be able to uplift our city of Buffalo and make a smart choice. Thank you.